It was an unusually quiet Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles when Jeff Bezos, recently retired from his active role at Amazon, found himself with a rare gap in his tightly scheduled day. After a breakfast meeting in Beverly Hills wrapped up early, Jeff decided to take a detour through a residential area on his way back to his private estate in Bel Air. He was driving himself that day, a matte black Lucid Air, something he rarely did, preferring the solitude and control it gave him over a chauffeur. The street was lined with modest homes, older but well-maintained, each with its own personality. It was a part of the city most billionaires wouldn't bother passing through, let alone slow down in. But Jeff, perhaps in a moment of nostalgia, or maybe boredom, reduced speed and rolled down his window slightly, letting in the crisp air that carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine and street tacos from a nearby vendor. As he approached a narrow intersection, something caught his eye: a young boy, no more than 8 or 9, sitting alone on the curb, shoulders hunched, his head buried in his arms. The child was crying, not loudly, but with that quiet, defeated sob that came from deep in the chest, the kind that children only make when they've been hurting for a while. His clothes were a bit dirty, but not ragged. A faded red backpack lay beside him, one of the zippers half torn. Jeff pulled over without thinking. For someone like him, accustomed to boardrooms, private jets, and tight security protocols, stopping to check on a crying stranger, especially a child, was far from routine. But something about the scene struck a chord in him. Maybe it was the boy's loneliness, or perhaps it reminded him of his own childhood, raised by a teenage mother, often moving, always trying to find their place. He parked just past the curb and stepped out. The boy didn't even look up. "Hey, buddy," Jeff said gently, crouching down a few feet away. "Are you all right?" The boy flinched slightly at the voice, then slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, cheeks wet. He seemed surprised that someone, especially someone dressed in a crisp shirt and expensive watch, was talking to him. "I lost my backpack," the boy mumbled. "Well, not this one. My other one. The one with my dad's stuff." Jeff furrowed his brow. "Your dad's stuff?" The boy nodded, sniffling. "He died last year. Mom gave me this backpack with some of his things. I take it with me sometimes when I feel scared. I brought it to school today, and now I can't find it. I think someone took it." Jeff felt a deep tug in his chest. He didn't respond immediately, just sat there, letting the boy talk. "I told the teacher, but she said to look in the lost and found. It's not there. I checked like 5 times. His voice cracked. "It had his old watch in it and his wallet. Mom said not to take it, but I wanted to feel like he was with me." Jeff sat back on his heels, considering the weight of what he was hearing. For a child, the loss wasn't just about misplaced items. It was about grief, memory, and a fragile connection to someone he'd lost too soon. "What's your name?" Jeff asked. "Marcus." "Well, Marcus," he said softly, "we're going to find that backpack. I promise." The boy gave him a skeptical look, like he'd heard too many broken promises before. Jeff reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Mind if I make a call?" He stepped a few feet away and dialed someone from his personal security team, more accustomed to tracking drones than backpacks, but resourceful nonetheless. Within minutes, his assistant, a man named Ray who'd once worked with private intelligence, was looped in. "I need surveillance access to the elementary school at 4th and Delmar," Jeff said, his voice low and serious. "Find out who entered and exited the school around 2:45 p.m. Check for anyone with a red or black backpack. Look for any street cameras nearby, too." Back near the car, Marcus looked up as Jeff returned. "You really think you can find it?" "I've got a few friends who are good at finding things," Jeff replied with a wink. Over the next hour, a web of calls and quiet coordination unfolded behind the scenes. Jeff sat on the curb with Marcus, chatting to keep him distracted. The boy started to open up. He talked about his dad, how he used to fix cars, how he always wore this old watch that ticked too loud, and how he used to call Marcus champ. Jeff listened, not as a billionaire, but as a man, one who had once been a boy himself, feeling small and lost. Ray called back. We got something. One of the cafeteria aides was caught on camera picking up a backpack that didn't belong to her. She left 10 minutes after school ended, carrying two. We're tracking her now. Bezos relayed the update to Marcus, who was stunned. Why would she take it? Some people forget how important things can be, Jeff said. Maybe she thought it was just lost. Maybe she thought no one would miss it. Within 40 minutes, Ray and a local contact had intercepted the woman at a small apartment complex. She claimed she was planning to turn it in later, but had taken it by mistake. Inside the bag, exactly as Marcus described, was the old watch, the wallet, and a folded photo of a man in military uniform, his father. By 5:30 p.m., a sleek black SUV pulled up near the curb. Ray stepped out, handed the backpack to Marcus with a gentle smile. The boy clutched it tightly, then looked up at Jeff. You kept your promise, he said. Jeff nodded. I told you I would. Then something unexpected happened. The boy stepped forward and hugged him tight. Jeff, caught off guard, slowly placed his arms around the child. In that moment, with no cameras rolling and no press releases being drafted, one of the richest men in the world became just a man giving comfort to a grieving kid. But the story didn't end there. The next day, Jeff returned, not with fanfare, not with an entourage. He met Marcus's mother, a nurse working double shifts, exhausted and overwhelmed. She was deeply apologetic for the trouble, but Jeff waved it off. Instead, he asked about Marcus's school, his interests, and what he liked to do. 2 weeks later, he quietly funded a full scholarship account in Marcus's name. He made a generous donation to the school's counseling and support services. He arranged for grief counseling not only for Marcus, but for other children dealing with similar losses. And every month, a book would arrive at Marcus's home. Books on science, engineering, space, each one with a handwritten note. For Champ. From your friend, Jeff. News of the event only reached the media after a school counselor leaked part of the story. By then, Jeff had long moved on to other projects, never speaking publicly about the encounter. When pressed in an interview, he simply said, sometimes the most important investments you make don't show up on a balance sheet. And so, while the world often saw him as a business tycoon, space race competitor, or billionaire entrepreneur, few knew about the day Jeff Bezos saw a crying boy on a curb, and how that one moment revealed more about a man than any fortune ever could. In the weeks that followed, life began to change, not just for Marcus, but for Jeff too. Something about that day stayed with him, lingering in his mind longer than the launch of any rocket or the closing of any deal ever had. For a man whose days were once measured in 30-minute increments, the memory of a child's silent tears had carved out a permanent space in his thoughts. Jeff began returning to the neighborhood quietly, sometimes in disguise, a baseball cap, sunglasses, a hoodie. He'd swing by the local school to check in on how Marcus was doing, under the guise of simply a friend of the family. The school principal, initially skeptical, soon understood the sincerity behind his visits. One day, after school let out, Marcus ran to the front gate, where Jeff stood waiting with 2 milkshakes in hand. You said you like vanilla, right? Jeff smiled. Marcus grinned and nodded. With extra whipped cream. They sat on a nearby bench in the park across the street, sipping shakes and watching other kids play on the jungle gym. Marcus was more relaxed now. He talked freely, laughing more than he cried. But in those conversations, Jeff heard a kind of quiet wisdom that caught him off guard. My dad used to say, hard days make strong people. Do you think that's true? Marcus asked one afternoon. Jeff looked down at his cup, swirling the melting shake. Yeah, I do. But I also think strong people are allowed to have help. From that day forward, Jeff didn't just check in on Marcus. He became a part of his life. He helped with school projects, attended parent-teacher conferences when Marcus's mom was stuck on a night shift, and even cheered him on at his first science fair. The boy had built a rudimentary solar-powered car from recycled parts. It didn't win first place, but Jeff proudly told anyone who would listen that it was a prototype in progress. More than anything, Jeff found himself changing too. His priorities shifted. The whirlwind of innovation and empire building that had once fueled his ambition began to take a back seat to something more grounded. Through Marcus, he saw the cracks in the system, the gaps that kids fell through, especially those from working-class families. One morning, while sitting in traffic, Jeff called Ray. "I want to set something up," he said. "Another scholarship fund?" Ray asked. "No, bigger. I want to build something that lasts. A foundation. For kids like Marcus. For the forgotten ones. For kids who just need a shot." Within months, the Bezos Roots Initiative was born. Not with a press conference or ribbon-cutting ceremony, but with a simple website and a quiet announcement. The mission was direct: fund mentorship programs, grief support services, mental health resources, and school infrastructure in under-resourced areas across the country. Back in Los Angeles, Marcus didn't fully understand the scale of what had happened. All he knew was that his world had become safer, more colorful, and filled with people who suddenly seemed to care. His grades improved. His teachers noticed a shift, not just academically, but emotionally. He was more confident, more curious. He even started a club called Fix It Fridays, where kids came together to repair broken things: radios, remote control cars, even microwave ones. Jeff donated a stack of toolkits without saying a word. The bond between them grew. Jeff, who'd once spent millions building rockets to escape Earth's gravity, found himself drawn deeper into its human weight. Every Saturday morning, he and Marcus would meet at a small diner halfway between the school and Jeff's Bel Air home. They'd sit in a corner booth, sharing pancakes and stories. Marcus would ask endless questions about space, robotics, and science. Jeff answered everyone with the patience of a teacher and the enthusiasm of a friend. Then came the moment that tested everything. It was a Thursday in late spring. Marcus had stayed home sick. His mother, working back-to-back hospital shifts, asked Jeff if he could check in on him. Jeff, who had a standing meeting with tech leaders that afternoon, canceled it without hesitation and headed straight to the apartment. Marcus lay curled on the couch, pale and feverish, but smiling when Jeff walked in with a bag of soup and Gatorade. "You didn't have to come," he whispered. "I did," Jeff said. "Your family." The word struck both of them silently. For a boy who had lost a father, and for a man who had once distanced himself from real emotional connection in pursuit of achievement, that simple word, family, meant everything. As Marcus rested, Jeff noticed a pile of mail on the kitchen counter. One envelope caught his eye, an eviction notice. The date stamped on it was just 3 weeks away. Jeff sat back in a chair, stunned. He had supported them quietly with groceries and covered a few school costs. But Marcus's mother had always insisted on handling the rent herself. She never asked for more. And now, they were about to lose their home. That night, Jeff met her outside the hospital, waiting in the staff parking lot. "I saw the notice," he said gently. "You should have told me." "I didn't want to depend on you," she said, holding back tears. "You've already done so much." "It's not about depending," Jeff replied. "It's about standing together." "Let me help." She finally agreed. The next morning, Marcus woke up in a new apartment, a better one, closer to school, with more space and light. It wasn't just charity. It was security, stability. It was a foundation. Months passed. Marcus thrived. By the time he turned 10, he was reading at a high school level and coding his own simple games. Jeff brought in tutors, not just in math and science, but in life. Engineers, authors, entrepreneurs, all people who came not to inspire from afar, but to sit with Marcus and show him the paths that were possible. Then came the first major spotlight. A journalist from the New York Times, tipped off by someone in the education community, approached Jeff for a feature story. She'd heard whispers about the boy from East LA and the billionaire who quietly became his guardian angel. Jeff was reluctant. He didn't want a public spectacle. But Marcus, now confident in his voice, surprised him. "Maybe people should know," he said, "so they don't feel alone." The story ran under the headline, "The Boy, the Billionaire, and the Backpack That Changed Everything." It went viral within days. People around the world responded, not just with admiration, but with action. Donations flooded the Bezos Roots Initiative. Mentorship programs sprang up in dozens of cities. Former teachers, single parents, and young professionals volunteered to become mentors. Corporations offered matching grants. Even some of Jeff's fiercest critics praised him for finally using his platform for something deeply personal and transformative. And through it all, Marcus remained grounded. He still rode his bike to school, still hosted Fix-It Fridays, still met Jeff every Saturday for pancakes. Years later, at a youth innovation summit sponsored by the Bezos Roots Initiative, Marcus stood on stage, now a teenager, poised and brilliant, speaking to an audience of thousands. "I lost a backpack," he said, "but I found something greater. I found someone who listened, someone who didn't just ask what was wrong, but stayed until it was right." The room was silent. "And now," he continued, "I want to be that someone for others." In the crowd, Jeff watched with pride, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had made a promise to a crying boy on a curb and kept it. After the summit, something shifted again. The world now knew about Marcus and Jeff, though they still met every Saturday at that same diner, pretending for an hour or two that none of the cameras existed. But outside, reporters waited. Offers came pouring in. Book deals, documentaries. Tech companies wanted Marcus as a young ambassador. Networks wanted interviews with Jeff about his philanthropic transformation. But Jeff wasn't interested in becoming a headline. He declined most interviews and instead focused inward on refining the Bezos Roots Initiative, expanding it into smaller cities, rural areas, even Native American reservations where kids like Marcus didn't just fall through the cracks, they were born into them. Behind the scenes, he set up partnerships with public schools to offer technology labs and mental health rooms. Quiet spaces where kids could go during the day if they felt overwhelmed or lost. He knew from Marcus's story that sometimes a child doesn't need a lecture or detention. They just need someone to sit next to them and ask, "Are you okay?" Meanwhile, Marcus was growing fast, both in stature and spirit. At 13, he launched an online platform called Backpack Stories, where children could anonymously share what they were going through: loss, loneliness, fear. The site quickly attracted national attention. Counselors signed up to offer responses. Teachers used the platform in their classrooms. Even celebrities quietly contributed letters to children, all sparked by one boy who had once cried quietly on a curb. One evening, as they walked out of the diner into a cool Los Angeles breeze, Marcus looked up at Jeff and said something that caught him off guard. "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" Jeff asked. "The old stuff. Running Amazon. The big stuff." Jeff paused. "Sometimes. But you know what?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The stuff I thought was big wasn't. Not really. The things that matter the most now? They're small, simple, like pancakes and backpacks." They both laughed, but there was truth in the words. Jeff Bezos had walked away from building a global empire to build something deeper. Legacy not measured in dollars, but in lives touched. Then, something unexpected happened again. Late one night, Jeff got a call from Marcus's mom. Marcus had been offered a spot in a special pre-college program for young engineers in Boston, a big opportunity. But he didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave Jeff behind. When Jeff came to see him the next morning, Marcus was sitting on the same couch, older now, but in the same pose as the first day they met, arms wrapped around himself, eyes red, unsure. "I don't want to go without you," Marcus said quietly. Jeff knelt down in front of him, just like he had that first day. "Marcus," he said, "the best thing I can do for you now is let you go. You have to fly. But what if I fail? Then you call me," Jeff said, "and we fix it. Like Fix-It Friday, remember?" Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. And so, with 2 suitcases and a heart full of fear and hope, Marcus left for Boston. Jeff stood at the airport gate until the plane disappeared from sight. The departure hit him harder than he'd expected. It was like letting go of something sacred. But he knew that growth meant letting go. Back in Los Angeles, the work continued. Jeff expanded the Roots initiative to include job training programs for young adults aging out of the foster system. He funded after-school robotics clubs in areas where kids had never even seen a 3D printer. And at night, he kept a photo of Marcus on his desk, wearing his father's old watch, holding a model rocket, smiling wide. They still spoke every week. Marcus would call from his dorm, sometimes excited, sometimes exhausted. They talked about school, roommates, the overwhelming math assignments, and the freedom of late-night pizza. And always, they ended their calls the same way. "Thanks, Jeff. Proud of you, champ." Then came graduation. For years passed. Jeff, now visibly older, attended the ceremony in Boston. The crowd was massive, and cameras were everywhere. But when Marcus stepped onto that stage, taller, confident, in a cap and gown, Jeff felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Afterward, at a quiet dinner in a small Italian place just off campus, Marcus slid a small box across the table. "What's this?" Jeff asked. "Open it." Inside was a watch. Not the old one from Marcus's father. This one was new, sleek, elegant. But on the back was an engraving. "For the man who showed me time doesn't have to be rushed." Jeff said nothing for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I think I finally understand," he said. "Understand what?" "What it means to build something that lasts." Marcus would go on to start his own company, focused on tech accessibility in low-income communities. His first hire was a kid from his old neighborhood who had been part of Fix-It Fridays. His first office had a mural on the wall, a boy sitting on a curb, holding a backpack with a man crouched beside him. It was titled, "The Day Everything Changed." And for Jeff Bezos, that day didn't just change one boy's life. It changed his own. In time, the world moved on to other headlines. Other billionaires rose and fell. But in quiet corners of America, on school walls, in community centers, and in backpacks worn by kids who finally felt seen, the story lived on. Not as a fairy tale, not as a PR campaign, but as a moment when one of the busiest men on earth stopped to listen to a crying boy. And in doing so, he changed everything. Years passed. Marcus's name began appearing in places once reserved for legacy innovators. Forbes, Wired, TechCrunch. But unlike most entrepreneurs, he rarely talked about profits or IPOs. Instead, he talked about people, about systems that fail children, about how the tiniest kindness can pivot an entire life. He launched an education startup called Groundwire, a platform that combined virtual tutoring with real-world mentorship. But instead of flashy investors, he funded the company using small grants from the Bezos Roots Initiative and a coalition of former public school teachers. Jeff served as an advisor, but not in a boardroom. Usually in a hoodie, sitting on a folding chair at Groundwire's modest headquarters in South Central LA, drinking weak coffee and listening. What started in one city spread like a spark across the country. Groundwire brought academic coaching, life mentorship, and emotional support into forgotten school districts. They didn't build new systems. They repaired old ones, like Marcus used to do at Fix-It Fridays. At a press event in Detroit, a reporter asked Marcus, "How do you measure success?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "By how many kids stop crying at the curb," he said simply. Behind him, Jeff smiled. But for all their accomplishments, both Marcus and Jeff carried the quiet memory of where it all started. Jeff still kept Marcus's original lost backpack in a display case in his office. Worn, faded, still zipped halfway. Inside were the same things: the broken science medal, the old phone, a bent photo of Marcus's father. That backpack had once carried pain. Now it carried purpose. Then one day, Marcus got a call, one he'd never expected. His childhood school, the one where he once ate lunch alone on the stairs, wanted to rename the building. They wanted to call it the Marcus Ellis Center for Innovation and Empathy. Marcus didn't know what to say. He called Jeff. "They're making it sound like I changed the world," Marcus said, pacing his apartment. "You did," Jeff replied. "No, you did. You stopped. You saw me. Jeff was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We saw each other." That's the truth. On the day of the ceremony, the entire neighborhood turned out. Kids waved hand-drawn signs. Teachers cried. Even Marcus's old bus driver came in a suit. When Marcus stepped up to the microphone, the crowd went silent. "I want you to know," he said, "that I wasn't special. I was just seen. And I believe every kid deserves to be seen. Not just once, not just in crisis, but every day. Because when you're seen, you start to believe you matter. And when you believe you matter, you could do anything." Jeff didn't speak that day. He didn't have to. His presence said enough. That night, after the crowd had left and the banners had been taken down, Marcus and Jeff sat in the schoolyard on a cold bench. It was quiet, the way it used to be. "Do you ever think about the first day?" Marcus asked. "All the time," Jeff said. "I was so scared." "I was too." They both laughed. Jeff reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Marcus. "What's this?" Marcus asked. "Open it." Inside was a small brass plate. On it, engraved in clean letters, was a simple message. "He changed my life, too. JB." Marcus stared at it for a long moment. "I thought I was the one who got lucky," Marcus whispered. Jeff shook his head. "You were the lucky one. But so was I." From that day forward, the story of the boy on the curb and the billionaire who stopped for him was told in classrooms, community centers, college lectures, and even churches. Not as a myth, not as a fairy tale, but as proof. Proof that the greatest empires are not built in boardrooms or by algorithms, but in the moments we choose to stop, kneel, and listen. Proof that empathy, when followed by action, can ripple across generations. And somewhere, in a school hallway in East LA, a replica of Marcus's old backpack hangs inside a glass case. Not because it carried books, but because it once carried a boy through the darkest hour of his life. And the man who found it, he just happened to be the richest man in the world. But in that moment, he was something greater. He was human, and that shocked everyone. In the years that followed the school renaming, Marcus's story became part of school curriculums in districts across America. Teachers used his journey not just to inspire students, but to teach empathy, resilience, and the power of mentorship. Yet Marcus himself remained grounded, still returning to his old neighborhood, still sitting at the same diner with Jeff whenever they were in the same city. One autumn afternoon, as they met for coffee in a quiet booth near the window, Jeff looked different. He was older now. His beard had gone almost entirely gray, and he moved a little slower. But his eyes hadn't changed. They still watched Marcus with pride, the way a father might watch his son step into his own name. Jeff had brought an envelope. It was thick and sealed with red wax. "What's this?" Marcus asked. "My will," Jeff said almost casually. "You're in it." Marcus sat back, stunned. "Jeff, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon," Jeff said, smiling. "But I want to make sure the work continues. The world changes fast. I want to make sure the world doesn't forget what we built. What you built." Inside, Marcus found a framework for what would be known as the Empathy Trust, an endowment in perpetuity designed to fund community-led innovation and trauma-informed youth programs in underserved cities, not for 10 years, not even 50, but forever. Jeff handed him a separate note, handwritten in slanted cursive. "This isn't a gift. It's a responsibility, one you've already proven worthy of. G." Marcus was quiet the rest of the afternoon. That winter, Jeff stepped back from all public life. No press conferences, no interviews, no new ventures. His face still graced business magazines, but his phone rang less and less. And he liked it that way. He spent time walking trails in Santa Fe, visiting libraries in tiny towns, and writing letters, hundreds of them, to young people who had reached out through Marcus's Backpack Stories platform. Some letters were typed. Others were handwritten. All were real. One read, "I don't know what you're going through, but I know what it feels like to be seen. Keep going. Someone out there cares about you. Ikare." Marcus continued to grow into his leadership. He spoke at global summits, advised presidents on education reform, and even turned down a billion-dollar offer to sell ground wire. This was never about money, he told them. It was about making sure no kid ever believes their pain is invisible. But the world moved on, as it always does. Tech fads came and went. Economies rose and fell. New billionaires were born on the backs of new algorithms. Still, one story, quiet and old-fashioned, lingered like a whisper beneath it all. The boy, the backpack, the billionaire who stopped. Then came the day the world stood still. News broke that Jeff Bezos had passed away peacefully in his sleep at his ranch in West Texas. He was 83. Tributes poured in from CEOs, astronauts, heads of state. But the most shared post online wasn't from a public figure. It was from Marcus. He posted a photo, a close-up of the original backpack, still sitting under glass. And a single caption. He stopped. That's all it took. Rest easy, Jeff. I'll carry it from here. At the private memorial, held in a small amphitheater overlooking a canyon Jeff had loved, Marcus gave the final speech. He stood alone at the podium, a man now fully in his own light. I was 9 years old when I met him. I didn't know his name. I just knew he saw me. And from that moment on, my life changed. Not because he was rich or famous or powerful, but because he cared, and because he stayed. He paused, his voice catching slightly. Jeff taught me something no textbook ever did. That kindness without consistency is just charity. But kindness with consistency? That's legacy. There were no applause lines. No dramatic soundtrack. Just silence. The kind that honors something sacred. After the service, Marcus sat alone for a while on a rock facing the canyon. In his hand, he held that same bent photo of his father, the one Jeff had once picked up from the street. And next to it, he placed a folded note Jeff had written long ago. You're not broken. You're becoming. And maybe that was the truth of it all. Jeff Bezos hadn't just helped a crying boy. He believed in him, again and again, until the boy became a man the world could believe in too. And for the millions who heard the story, who carried their own invisible weight, the message was simple but earth-shaking. You matter, even if no one has said it yet. You matter. As the years moved on, Jeff Bezos didn't disappear from the public eye. He evolved. Gone was the image of the relentlessly driven CEO. In its place stood a man who had learned the value of presence, of pausing, of choosing meaning over momentum. And perhaps that lesson had been sparked not in a boardroom, but on a street curb years earlier, when he stopped for a crying boy with a broken backpack. Marcus, now in his mid-30s, had transformed ground wire into a national movement. But he and Jeff didn't just collaborate, they grew closer. Their bond was no longer mentor and mentee. It was something deeper, like family forged through fire. They began hosting something called the Empathy Dinners, intimate roundtables held once a month in different cities, where CEOs, teachers, social workers, and even former gang members sat at the same table. No cameras, no headlines, just stories shared honestly over simple meals. These dinners began shaping policy behind the scenes, not through lobbying, but through listening. One night in Oakland, a 17-year-old girl named Daisha spoke during one of those dinners. I used to think the world wasn't made for people like me, she said. But then I met someone who told me, the world isn't finished being made yet. That's your job now. Jeff's eyes lit up. That was Marcus, he said, smiling proudly. But Daisha shook her head. Actually, it was you. A hush fell over the room. Later that night, as Jeff and Marcus walked to their car, Jeff was unusually quiet. You okay? Marcus asked. Jeff nodded slowly. I just realized something, he said. I've spent most of my life building things to scale. Platforms. Products. But the most meaningful thing I've ever helped build was a single person. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. That moment, shared between two men under a quiet streetlight, would go on to inspire what became one of the boldest experiments in modern philanthropy, the 1,000 Lives Project. The idea was deceptively simple. find 1,000 young people around the world, forgotten, ignored, or at risk, and pair them with long-term mentors, resources, education, therapy, and direct investment. Not charity. Partnership. Not a masses. One by one. It was the opposite of everything Silicon Valley preached. It couldn't be scaled quickly. It couldn't be automated. But it worked. Kids who were barely surviving began thriving. Former child laborers became engineers. Street vendors became small business owners. One boy who had been living in a refugee camp became the youngest elected official in his district. When asked what changed his life, he didn't mention money. He said, someone showed up and never stopped showing up. Jeff began traveling less and sitting more, listening to people with time instead of technology. He said no to billion-dollar ventures and yes to school visits, juvenile centers, and midnight phone calls with young people who needed someone steady. One journalist wrote, Bezos has become a ghost in Silicon Valley, but a legend in underserved neighborhoods. When asked about it in a rare interview, Jeff responded, my most profitable decision didn't make me richer. It made me useful. The world began to take notice, not of his wealth, but of what he chose to do with it when he stopped chasing more. Meanwhile, Marcus continued writing. His memoir, Backpack Nation, became an instant bestseller. But more than that, it became a curriculum in schools, prisons, and shelters. The first chapter didn't start with pain or trauma. It started with a question. What would the world look like if someone had stopped for you? Years later, a teacher from Tulsa wrote to Marcus. She said one of her students, once considered unreachable, had read the book. The boy had circled a single sentence on page 3 and tattooed it on his forearm. You are not a burden. You are a beginning. Marcus sent the letter to Jeff, who printed it and pinned it above his desk. That same week, the two met again, this time not in private, but at a global education summit. Jeff was asked to give the keynote, but instead he brought Marcus on stage. I'm not the keynote, Jeff said. He is. Marcus stood quietly, then leaned into the mic. I was crying on a curb when he found me. I thought that day was rock bottom, but it was really the foundation. That one moment of kindness gave me a ladder out, not to success, but to service. He paused, scanning the room. There are more kids on more curbs. Don't walk past them, because the world changes not when we invent something new, but when we remember who we're supposed to be. The crowd stood, not for fame, not for power, but for two men who had proven, over and over, that real transformation begins with a question and a choice. And as the applause died down, Jeff leaned toward Marcus and whispered, I'm not done yet. Neither was Marcus. Together, they weren't building companies anymore. They were building a world that could see every forgotten child. And no one was shocked anymore. They were inspired. Years passed, but the story of the crying boy and the billionaire who stopped became something larger than either of them. It was shared in classrooms, corporate retreats, government workshops, not as a fairy tale, but as a blueprint, a reminder that no matter how powerful, how wealthy, or how busy someone might be, the smallest act of attention could become the spark that rewires a life. Marcus eventually stepped down from running ground wire, not out of fatigue, but to make space for the next generation. He began quietly mentoring the very same kinds of kids he once was, those with haunted eyes and heavy hearts. But unlike before, those kids weren't being ignored. The system had changed, because people had changed. There are now backpack clinics in 26 countries, safe spaces where kids could talk, eat, study, cry, or just breathe. Each center had a framed plaque near the entrance that read, You are not forgotten. Someone saw you. Someone still does. Jeff Bezos, now in his late 80s, no longer held meetings in glass towers or gave speeches under lights. He met people in parks, cafes, and bookstores. He often went unrecognized, and he liked it that way. He didn't want a spotlight. He wanted eye contact, quiet conversations, the real stuff. One rainy afternoon, in a small library in Portland, he sat reading letters, hundreds of them, letters from children who had once thought their story didn't matter. Some were written in crayon, others typed on borrowed computers. But all of them ended the same way. Thank you for stopping. That night, Marcus called him. You still reading letters? He asked. Jeff chuckled. Every day. There was a long pause. Sometimes I think back to that day, Marcus said. The curb. The backpack. My face must have looked like a mess. Jeff replied gently. It looked like a future. You just didn't know it yet. Silence again. The kind filled with gratitude, not absence. You changed my life, Jeff, Marcus said finally. But Jeff shook his head, even though Marcus couldn't see it. No, he said softly. You let me changed. That's the difference. That's the miracle. And maybe that was the quiet truth behind everything. It wasn't just that Jeff Bezos stopped. It wasn't just that he helped. It was that he kept showing up until the boy believed he was worth it. Until that boy helped others believe it too. In the end, the story didn't end in some dramatic twist or media frenzy. It ended in a ripple, a quiet, unstoppable wave of presence and purpose that spread across generations. No fame, no fortune, just a boy, a backpack, a question, a choice, and the legacy of what happens when we stop, not to fix, but to care. Because sometimes the most shocking thing of all is kindness that doesn't quit.